presentation. Unfortunately, you don't have the slides, you can't see, but I will present them as I have planned. I've called it Towards an Ubuntu World. It is about the vision or visions which social movements in different parts of the world now, in my opinion, appear to be promoting, and I'll come to some detailed explanations in a moment. This is a great South African Zulu language term which means I am because you are. So this mutuality of existence, interdependence of the species, the humans, the groups, the languages, the cultures, and so on, is the theme. Nelson Mandela, whose centenary we are celebrating this year, 18th July would be the day, and Desmond Tutu picked up this term in the context of the post-apartheid reconstruction to build new relationships of mutual trust. But I find it much more than that. It's a far greater potent concept and has many implications, as I will explain. And the social movements which inspire us today, especially during the last 30 years in different parts of the world, and which are represented adequately intellectually and politically here, indeed share this vision. But how to make that mutuality exploitation free, that is the question, and that is why we have to critically examine the context. So, Towards an Ubuntu World, new discourses on the upsurge of the commons and visions of the future. I have a slide which talks about my sources of learning, not so much from books and academic sources. It is from my experience as part of many similar groups. The most important being the People's Union for Democratic Rights. I had a list of their websites in the, but this will be in the website, I think. Yeah, so you can add these also. National Alliance of People's Movements. This is the Alliance of People's Movements in India. Medha Patkar is the well-known name leading this. This morning I got a mail saying that 90 civil society organizations are having a parallel meeting in Mumbai next week when the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is having its board meeting. So like the WTO meetings and the social movements protest gatherings, a similar thing this movement is organizing. Unfortunately, it is clashing with our program, so I'm not able to attend that. Then the Pakistan India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy, which we set up 32 years ago, and struggling for creating conditions of peace. And some of the most heroic members of this group, both in India and Pakistan, have been great sources of inspiration. Then there are small initiatives that we did in the university, Grassroots Politics Colloquium, and which now takes the form of the Creative Theory Colloquium, which annually meets on the Indian Teachers' Day, September 5th every year in India International Center to discuss such issues. But the two global networks which have been great sources of learning, one is the Bandung Spirit Network, where we first interacted with the South-South group, Kimchi, Jed and others, and the Global University of Sustainability, this forum. I would add several others, the Reagan in Rio, led by the late Theotonio dos Santos, and so on. And some of these, like the period, and I think Muto-san knows the Rajni Kothari centered group. I'm also a part of the same group. But now some of our activities have led to some publications. Unfortunately, I did carry some copies which got adjusted in my 3 weeks in the mainland. So I don't have a single copy here of the Exploring Emergent Global Thresholds. This is a book on global future, some of these exactly issues that we are doing. And then the Bandung Legacy and Global Future, which is just published in Delhi. And last being the Swaraj and the Reluctant State. It was the Gandhi's Hind Swaraj Centenary Seminar in 2009. It was a global people's movement, intellectuals and activist seminar. We have produced the first volume last month. It's called Swaraj and the Reluctant State. The second volume, which I am supposed to edit, is getting delayed, but it will be out before our next conference in the 150th anniversary of Gandhi's birth next year, when we do have the plan to organize. I'll send some communication about that to this group. Now, I think the visions of global future emerge, and this is my urging to my colleagues here and in similar forums, that we have to come out with our alternative frameworks. I think resistance literature has grown immensely, but alternative literature is still limited, and that is why there is a challenge before all of us. It has to capture the new consciousness of self-determination, and that is what I have in mind in the Gandhi tradition, which is to be put in the anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist tradition, the concept of Swaraj. I will come to that in a moment. So, self-determination of individuals, groups and regions. So, the concept of self-determination in the current era, which now requires political, economic, social, cultural, environmental institutionalizations and frameworks, has this new meaning. It has a particular challenge in the current moment, how to interlink our solidarity actions directly in the context of the information technology and communication monopolies which exist. I'm glad we are able to stream our things using the YouTube and so on, our deliberations, but look at the global monopoly of communication technology, whether it is Google, WhatsApp, whatever, they are all Western capitalist monopolies. In the context of that, how do we continue our solidarity action and produce alternatives? And our reference point is that our struggles have created, and this is the moment of optimism and not pessimism, have created a democratic environment in the history of human civilization. That is why civilizational perspective becomes very important. And then the last 200 years, industrial revolution, imperialism, and then the anti-colonial struggle and the post-colonial reconstruction is all part of this epoch, and we have to understand it in the long period of human history of 5,000 years at least. And therefore, the global futures have to be articulated from one's vantage point, from every part of the world and from every group defining its location in struggle. I think Ngugi was emphasizing it, has been emphasizing it. He first talked about it in his book on decolonization of the mind, that you have to move the center, the post-colonial. Actually, Frantz Fanon had raised it first. He has articulated it better, that the location of imagination the vantage point of conceptualization of the world has to be relocated in the locations of struggle. So in all parts of the world. So for a long time it was just the metropolitan West, and we didn't have the capacity to imagine, to locate and to view the world. So from our vantage points we have to repossess and recapture our visions of past and future. So the vantage point is very important, which is spatial, moment of struggle, location of struggle in all parts of the world. This is why South is so important. South is so important. But there are South points even in the North. We have allies or partners. Then temporal, this moment of the neoliberal capital exploitations, this point. So spatial, temporal, social, the caste, gender, caste, class, ethnic, racial, the struggles, the cumulative struggles of location. From there we look at the cultural location and the political location. So the vantage point has to be very consciously defined to freshly understand history and freshly look at the future. And what I am doing is really talking about the language of social movements with which I have interacted, either as a member of the PUDR, going there and writing reports, or doing some research projects. We have 2-3 books on that: people's rights, grassroots democracy, etc. So it's really their language I'm translating into a sort of a framework for communication. For example, we don't have others, but Jal, Jamin, Jungle, water, land and forest is the slogan of Marxists as well as Gandhians, Naxalites and Sarvodaya Gandhians in Chhattisgarh, in central India, like that. Bhita Mati, the concept which has inspired me for the last 30 years. I first heard it in the Balyapal struggle against the missile range, for which they had to displace a lot of people, and they wanted to assert their right to the land and succeeded in preventing the location. That gave the concept of Bhita Mati, which I'll talk, I have translated that into the right to earth as a new right, and so on. The Niyamgiri movement and the anti-POSCO movement, Korean friends will forgive me, but we are of the same kind. If you were in India, you would also oppose the POSCO, which caused displacement, and we have succeeded in preventing its location in Orissa, in Jagatsinghpur. So those ideas, slogans, rationalizations we have taken to formulate what I have called towards the Ubuntu world. And the tribal people's movement in India, both the Sarvodaya movement, the Gandhian movement, the autonomy movement of the last 100 years, and the Naxalite movement, the Maoist armed struggle movement, all together, what do they compose in terms of analysis of existing conditions, contradictions, and visions of the future? And of course the human rights movement, women's movement has been a greatest, in fact, I consider the women's movement in India and globally as redefining the parameters of social movement discourse in general for all movements in so many ways, and some of it yesterday Professor Lee referred to. So that's the basis of my formulation. And this process of change, how should we conceptualize that? I call it visions of multidimensional freedom or transformation as civilizational movement. Epochs of history have to be called civilizational movement. Civilization discourse by sociologists, anthropologists, and not your kind, the mainstream anthropologists I have so many friends, we are in the solidarity movement, has been firstly a selective, great civilization-centric civilization discourse, And secondly, a derivative discourse from Western definition of civilization, the Toynbee framework and then down. We have to redefine the meaning of civilization. Humanity and other species together have built civilizations which are values, forms and communication patterns, artistic and many other forms of stable patterns that evolve and change. And all parts of the world have civilizations. I remember the first time in somebody's personal library, I saw a book, African Civilizations. I picked it up. I said, oh, somebody has written about it, African civilizations. In Lagos, I wanted to visit the museum. My professor, political science professor, said, the ethnic museum or the history museum? I said, history museum. He said, you are the first visitor who asked to visit the history museum. Everybody wants to visit the ethnic museum in Lagos. Now, in other words, we were told that non-Western people have no history and Africa is uncivilized, dark continent, that discourse. On the first day we discussed that quite a lot here, not this, So we have to own the civilization of all people everywhere on earth. In India, well, I'll come to that in a moment. So not only political freedom and economic growth, comprehensive social development and environmental preservation seen in deeper civilizational dimensions, entailing newer relationships among humans, individuals, groups and regional habitations, and between humans and nature. Therefore, our definition of sustainability has to capture that. I'm afraid sustainability in the Sustainable Development Goals does not fully capture that. It is still limited. It has made some advance over the Millennium Development Goals, but not fully. Therefore, our definition of sustainability is the civilizational definition of sustainability. We are celebrating, last year we celebrated the Bolshevik Revolution centenary. I was so happy Wang Hui had that as the reference point. This year we are celebrating 200th anniversary of Karl Marx birth and Nelson Mandela's centenary of birth. Next year is 150th birth anniversary of Gandhi and the 100th anniversary of May 4th movement. The complex interaction with Western ideas. Many Japanese scholars are, rejoining this cultural discourse. Was it imitation of the West? Mr. Democracy, Mr. Science in the May 4th movement, was it just? I think the Levinson formulation has to be reread on that. And of course, 2021, centenary of the founding of the Communist Party of China, another historic moment, and the centenary of the non-cooperation movement that Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian Congress launched, and Gandhi suddenly withdrew because of a violent attack on a police station. That was 1921. So and we will have the centenary of the non-cooperation movement also in 2021. So what do all these celebrations add up to? I think civilizational movement being redefined by social movements of our time. Now we have been using the word transformation, and we have many of my friends and I had this debate with Rajni Kothari for many years that you are abandoning the concept of development to the developmentalists. I have refused to abandon the concept of development. I want to own it and define it in my way, my social movement way. I know in India we have this, this is also a difference of opinion, Vikas and Vinas. Vikas means development, Vinas is destruction. So Mehta Patkar constantly says, no, this is not Vikas, this is Vinas. So we have to, I said, does it mean we have to give up the word Vikas? Nobody can give up the word Vikas. in our languages. So Fachang, you can't give up Fachang in Chinese. So therefore, I would like to redefine development as a process of social change which is at once materially productive, socially just in terms of class, caste, ethnicity, gender, etc., environmentally sustainable, and a process that gives the right to the people to choose and direct the path of development. So the democratic right to choose, direct, control. So democratic rights is a part of that development. So the economistic notion that capitalism and now neoliberalism has presented and imposed on us as economic growth. For 50 years we have debated that, but we can't abandon our concept of development. We have to own, redefine, and carry on. And this I learned from Deng Xiaoping when rest of the world was attacking the concept of modernization. He decided to define the entire next generation of China's transformation as 4 modernizations. And now Xi Jinping has said modernization will be completed basically by 2035. So conceptual discourse has to be put in a very carefully constructed way. Now, I am now coming to the social movement concepts which have come to us through these movements in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And I still have not settled on this concept of Amman. I mean, yesterday there was a reference in some of the yesterday or day before in some of the Latin American presentations, and Monica Brockman has written on this concept of Mother Earth in Spanish and Portuguese and how the movements discourse. But I have not done enough homework on that, therefore I have not settled on a concept. But 3 concepts which have guided me in understanding this epoch and conceiving of future possibilities. One is Swaraj, which comes from the Gandhi led discourse of anti-colonial struggle and which continues to inspire Indian people's movements. Then Chiefang, liberation, which comes from the comes from the anti-colonial revolution in China, anti-Japanese war to begin with, and then but the period which I lived through is the Vietnam Liberation War against the United States. And the liberation discourse at that time spread all over the world, not only in Bolivia and other countries. The women's liberation movement, the Dalit liberation movement, and so many liberation movements all over the world came up. And in India, the term mukti, which is liberation, is a very common term for all oppressed people's movements. So that is Chiefang and Ubuntu, as I mentioned before. These are the 3 terms which together, Swaraj, Chiefang, and Ubuntu, which together constitute not only my understanding of the contradictions, my understanding of future possibilities for which humanity at least has articulated its aspirations in the last 100 years and conceptualized future for the next centuries perhaps. And all this have been facilitated by the Marxist critique of capitalism, all of them. And to begin with, Swaraj, on which Gandhi wrote in 1909, was a critique of capitalism, Western democracy, and industrialism. Hind Swaraj, the little book, 60-page book in the form of dialogues, is about that. And we have many books on that. So Swaraj means it is an anti-colonial concept that grows into endless pursuit of multidimensional freedom. Swa means self, Raj means rule, as if through endless struggle for a new relationship of freedom. This is what Gandhi said, and he had said as early as 1909 and reiterated in 1947, the few months that he lived after our freedom. He said, he had said in 1909 that these white rulers will go, brown rulers from our own country may do the same things or similar things. You have to continue the struggle for Swaraj, okay, after that. It is pursuit of various dimensions of self-determination, self-rule, and self-realization. Self-realization. And here, self is not the atomistic, individualist, liberal theory notion of the self. And self as individual, group, or region is not conceived in the framework of self and the other. I have another paper called Who Invented Othering? Othering was invented by exploiters, from slave society and Brahmins in caste society, and it has continued. And the period when self and other discourse became most distinct in the postmodernist, post-colonial literature on imperialism and the other. Imperialism treating itself as self and the rest as the other. I'm saying that humanity has other ways of explaining exploitation and recapturing human relationship as self and self. And so my notion of self, Mahatma Gandhi's notion of self, Marx's notion of self, it is against alienation of the self. Even the capitalist is finally alienated. We have to rescue the capitalist from the capitalist system, and the individual has to then become a worker. You see, Mao said, cure the disease and save the patient. Okay, the same idea. So self and self, not an atomistic neoliberal concept. And now, during the last 30 years, global literature has celebrated, within quotes, individualist competition and giant mergers having the fat, big, powerful corporations or fat, big, powerful Trumpian militaristic power. You see, the image of competition and hegemony, that is not the self. The self is the Ubuntu concept of self, the Swaraj concept of self. Yes, therefore, this self and the struggle for self-realization is an anti-feudal, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist, anti-Brahminic or anti-caste, anti-patriarchal, and similar dominations concept of self, which needs to be liberated. So Chefang becomes the other core concept. And this is what has been the core concept of the last 100 years people's movements of various kinds. So liberation or people's liberation, another concept again came from the Chinese Revolution, and very interestingly, this Swa and Jana Janagana, our, in India, this was revived during the JP movement in 1974, and after that we had Janata Party. Janata means people. So many Jana parties, so many Lokdal. We have about 50 political parties using the term people in their own language. You see, so the concept of people is not peculiar to China. It is there in so many people's struggles all over the world. And people's liberation, and it's not a Chinese monopoly, Chinese Communist Party monopoly. It is the people's liberation is the agenda of all people's movements during the last 100 years at least. And in Asia, Africa, Latin America, we have in some writings used the word ASAFLA, Asia, Africa, Latin America. In anti-colonial struggles in Asafla, this concept of liberation has acquired very special meaning. And after Vietnamese victory over the US in 75, the world was full of celebrating the concept of liberation in many, many ways. And therefore, here Chefang is a continuous process of emancipation from all kinds of domination: imperialism, hegemony, class, caste, race, gender, ethnic, and conditions created by them. And many similar dominations which we have not yet come across. Now, the artificial intelligence and the new digital political economy is going to create new dominations, as we have seen. Therefore, Chefang is a continuous process. Liberation is a continuous process. Therefore, our goal is the Ubuntu world. As I said, and unfortunately, in Africa also, very few people have worked on this. Now it is getting some currency. In the Witwatersrand, there is a group on African philosophy. They have recently produced a small bit of writing on this. In next year, this year and next year, in Mandela and Gandhi context, we will produce some literature. And here I invite friends from the South-South Forum from all parts of the world to think about how humans have related in history and through political struggles to cope with challenges of oppression, exploitation, and domination, and re-establish human conditions of freedom, liberation, and Ubuntu. Now here there are three important elements of Ubuntu which we have to keep in mind, because only then, and that is why Swaraj, Chefang, and Ubuntu are integrally connected. One is the concept of equality. I am because you are. We really treat each other as equal. And we are having this discourse at a time when inequality is growing all over the world. Today, China, which was one of the most egalitarian societies until 40 years ago, is today one of the most inegalitarian societies of the world, despite so many achievements. And India is another unequal society. I have no time to talk about Gini coefficient, you know all that. So equality is a central principle. Equality of individuals, groups, cultures, languages, anything that goes with a human identity. Religion, all religions have to deserve equal respect. This whole period of fundamentalism has grown because of the decline of the sense of equality of religions. And so the secular model got appropriated by modernists, capitalists, and secularism has been defamed in all countries, in India particularly. That's why we have a Hindu fanatic regime in power. And secularism was based on equality of all religions. And therefore equality as a principle in terms of language, culture, literature, civilizations. Imperialism created gradations, hierarchies of civilized. And the anti-colonial struggle challenged that. But we have not, pedagogically and epistemologically, we have not translated that into our belief that religions are equal. So equality is the central principle of Ubuntu. Second, mutuality and interdependence. You may be a great artist. If there is nobody who can understand, appreciate it, then that art has no value. From that simple thing to how we have grown and interdependence of humans and species, interdependence of humans and species, shared civilization. I have an essay called "All Cultures Are Intercultural." And indeed, all cultures are intercultural. All cultures have learned from each other. So interdependence and mutuality is the great contribution of this concept of Ubuntu. And Mandela has a beautiful lecture on explaining this Ubuntu concept, referring to a traveler who is walking from village to village and reaches a place. Sorry, my time, how much time I have? For 15? Oh, great. That will be enough. He says, when somebody stops in a unknown village where he doesn't or she doesn't know anybody, the first person who will see him or her will first bring a glass of water or a pot of water, say, first drink some water, and then he will ask or she will ask, where are you from, or what do you want, how can I help you, and so on. That is the way strangers, and we have personally experienced it in many marches and civil liberty investigations in so many unknown places. So Ubuntu is interdependence, mutuality. Unfortunately, there is no political theory of mutuality. Those of us who are from political science. And we are so preoccupied explaining and critiquing. We have not created a new book on a new concept of freedom. No book on freedom has a chapter on either Gandhi or Swaraj or anything. And mutuality is, again, not a political concept even now. And the third element of Ubuntu is the critical dynamism as a transformative experience of all phenomena, all cultures, all individuals, all groups, all civilizations, all traditions, that everybody has had a history of evolution, reassessing the past, getting rid of some of the evils, whether it is untouchability in India, foot binding in China, racism everywhere, slavery, or whatever, patriarchy, and so on. In other words, civilization, even civilizations, they may take 1,000 years to change, cultures may take 100 years to change, societies may take less time in urban, in some controlled changes and so on, but change they do. Dynamic transformation and the dialectics of it. This is the greatest learning from dialectical and historical materialism in history, which you make it dialectical, not determinist. Okay, and so the dynamic transformation of everybody. So this also has to be has to enter into everybody's analytical frame, that we all have problems we inherit. Europe cannot claim to have a undiluted, glorious civilization or culture. No country can. Neither Chinese nor Indians and so on. So when we are celebrating the revival of Hindu civilization under the present regime, or the Confucian civilization under the present regime in China and so on, we have to bring in critical, dynamic element in historiography, put it in a common language differently. Thus, the Ubuntu world is emerging. Social movements, I mean, when you have a meeting like this, or some of the World Social Forum gatherings, or many of us have experienced this, yes, the world, but the world is not just what the neoliberal world and its propagandists present. It has many contradictions, many trends, many struggles, and the Ubuntu world is emerging. Setbacks, there are many things to be pessimistic about, but it is emerging. And it is emerging in a framework which has clearly moved from framework of charity, which moved to framework of welfare state and welfare policies, whether under socialism or capitalism, to framework of rights in the context of liberation, in the context of Tiefang. Now, rights have been totally monopolized by liberal theories, and many Marxists have been so allergic because of that to the rights theories. And I remember in our earlier years of human rights movement, so many of my Marxist friends would not join us because you are making compromises with these liberal humanists and so on, giving up class struggle, giving up radical politics and so on. When we split, PUCL and PUDR split in India in 1980, we found that there was some little different understanding on democratic rights. We said, please, rights must not be left, like development. Rights must not be left to the bourgeois rights discourse. There was a context in which Marx critiqued bourgeois rights. There was a context in which Lenin has a critique, even Mao has. But there is a context in socialist and in a communist period, theoretically we can discuss, right becomes a more meaningful participatory fulfillment of liberation, you see. So I define rights as not claims recognized by law or brutally speaking, brutally is a wrong word, sorry. Very frankly speaking, it is a concession by the rulers. Okay? It is not so. Rights are political affirmations in course of struggle. These are achievements through human and social struggles. Rights are political affirmations. When Swaraj was my birthright was a slogan of Tilak in 1898, there was no law. Law came much later. Independence came 100 years or even later, and so on. Untouchability. The right to social equality was a right already in the Congress framework. So the Constitution just acknowledged it. Today, several rights are not acknowledged by law or UN document or the Constitution. We still affirm them as rights because enough people at this moment of a civilization's history regard it as right and not acceptable, not right and right against wrong. It is wrong to be a slave, to have slavery. Civilization treats it as unacceptable. So rights are political affirmations in course of struggle. And that new definition of rights continues to expand the realm of rights. In our grassroots politics colloquium in Delhi University, 1 year we decided to have, every year we take up one right. 1 year we decided to have it on right of people with disabilities. Some of my political theory friends said, is that a right or a value? That was long before the UN accepted the Disability Rights Convention. We had a most interesting debate. We said, let us decide it today. Rights of differently able people. It has to be brought into the rights discourse. And please remember, we had a charity discourse, compassion, charity. Yes, all that is important. We have a welfare discourse, state giving policies of welfare. Yes. And now we are in the rights framework, but rights in a liberation framework, in an Ubuntu framework. Okay? Not in the capitalist neoliberal framework of rights. So rights discourse requires a new vantage point of redefinition. And therefore, we have 3 new rights in my next 4 minutes. 3 new rights which have come up. And 30 years from now, those who will be alive would see how these rights are actually being asserted and formulated, and there will be UN recognition or constitutional recognition. Right to self, not right to individuality or this and that, not right to personal liberty, which we have in the Constitution, and right to self has a much larger meaning. Affirmation of the composite creativity related things, self as a creative being. History of civilization is history of human creativity. A creative theory of civilization, creative theory of human, creative theory of self creates a notion of creative self. Right now, liberal theory, capitalist theory of individualism has created an obsessive self, which has to be replaced by a notion of a creative self. So right to self is right to a creative self. All social transformation is about enabling beings to realize their potentiality, creative potentiality, so that they become capable of contributing more to civilization. Okay? So right to self. Right to earth, this Vitamati right that I first heard some 30 years ago, it emerging, and in the year of the indigenous people's rights that UN had, and yesterday you had Dr. Barkin had referred to and others referred to. Right to earth is the right of people over local resources, material and cultural. Right to the knowledge systems, not intellectual property that capitalism has defined. Right to natural and cultural resources, and right to share it with the world on mutually agreed terms. This is why participatory democracy in socialism is so important. Participatory democracy in communism is so important. Self-governance is so important. And therefore, right to earth is the greatest contribution to the anti-displacement movements all over the world during the last 20 years particularly. And third, because right to earth, without that they are being robbed of their not only natural resources but also cultural resources. Not only resources on the ground and below the ground, but also the whole cultural system, and this body knows this debate. So right to earth is so important. And another right which is emerging, and it's going to gather more momentum, is right to history. Right to history. First we were told we didn't have history. Then Chinese have history, Indians don't have history because Chinese have written, the oracle bones to now and the dynastic histories and so on. Indians have Shruti, memory based, that debate. So history is not what Oxford, Cambridge, historiography, earlier historiography, now there are some radicals, has defined history as. History is the present generation's way of relating to, as long as possible, to get meaning of the contemporary and also meaning of the earlier events. So it's a construction of the past. And everybody relates to culture, civilization, art, music, knowledge system, material and non-material heritage, and so on. Therefore, in India, the history debate is the greatest arena of class struggle, not only sort of political struggle between religious and that kind of struggle. Therefore, friends, the Ubuntu world that social movements of our lifetime have conceptualized is going to be a continuing inspiration and a great challenge which awaits intellectual formulations, pedagogical transformations, and theoretical work to take it forward. And I think we may try to be equal to that task. Thank you very much.